So, welcome everybody to third session of Qualifie. So today's session is on decolonizing fieldwork. And yeah, I mean, most of you, I think, been to the previous sessions, but those who haven't, Qualifie is the Qualitative and Fieldwork Working Group at the EUI, and kind of what we're trying to do here is giving some space to qualitative methodology and fieldwork related methodology at the EUI and kind of provide a hub for training and discussions in that regard. And so we have two forms of activities. One you're attending right now, which is our seminar series. And the other one is paper presentations, which I think we haven't yet organized one. So the idea is if you have a working paper on qualitative methodology or fieldwork related topics, to which you want to have feedback on, you can drop us a line anytime, and we would organize an event and organize a discussion for your work, so you can get feedback and advance your projects. We are already planning on a first paper presentation probably in the beginning of April, but yeah, whenever you have something which is in dire need of feedback, you can let us know. So today is part of the seminar series on decolonizing fieldwork, and kind of what we're trying to think about in today's session is kind of having a reflection on the colonial practices within fieldwork and how maybe as a global north researcher, especially given the context of the EUI, we should be aware of these things and seek ways to mitigate and reflect on its consequences. Specifically, we also want to think about research fatigue and over-researching. And yeah, to give us insights into all of these questions, we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Mayssoun Sukarieh, who has kindly agreed to give some of her personal experience and and past research on these topics and give us a talk about these issues. Mayssoun is a senior lecturer at King's College in the Department of International Development. She has received a PhD in the University of California, Berkeley, and previously taught in universities both in the US as well as in the Middle East. And Mayssoun's work mostly focuses on the social, economic, and cultural transformations within the Middle East following neoliberal developments. She has published on knowledge production about refugees, on decolonizing education, as well as the political economy and knowledge production about youth. So we are really delighted to have you for today's session. The session will look as follows. So first, Mayssoun will give a talk on the topic of today, about up to 30 minutes. And after that, basically, we open up the session for a general free-flowing discussion where everybody can jump in as they wish. Yeah, you have the opportunity, especially also to ask Mayssoun any questions, both theoretical and practical, which you might have. Mayssoun said she has to leave shortly before 2 our time for a few minutes, but we'll see how the discussion goes until then. But there's the possibility also that Mayssoun joins us again then, so we'll take it from there. Note that the session is recorded, so if you don't want to be in the recording, please deactivate, you can also join us, but just deactivate your camera and write any comments or questions you have in the chat. Then we can read them out loud, but you can still join the discussion and contribute to the workshop. So enough in the introduction talk from my side. So Mayssoun, please, you have the floor. You're muted still. Mayssoun, you're muted.
Hello, hi.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity to have more of a conversation. So, and to learn together about decolonizing and the way I think about decolonizing. I wish it were face to face because would have loved to be in Florence, but next time, inshallah. Okay, so I was asked to to talk about decolonizing research, I do believe that we still really act in a colonialist setting of research in the issue, in the sense that it's most universities in the global north are usually studying the global south, people in the global south and different topics. And most of the funds of research also comes from the global north, universities, agencies, and the topics are decided in this colonial setting of knowledge production. So while decolonizing research is to think through issues of the political economy, decolonizing research usually focus on the techniques of political economy, right? So, techniques of research, how to decolonize the techniques of research and the methodology. What I want to focus on is decolonizing research through thinking of issues of political economy of knowledge production in a world that is still mired by inequality and power relations. So in order to highlight these power relations and think through how we can decolonize research, I would like to cover the knowledge production of refugee research in the Middle East, and basically in Lebanon, my home country. To think through decolonizing methodology. Before starting to tell you about like the stories of field research, I want to make 2 points. The first point is that when we talk about decolonizing methodology, in the way I understand it, we need to start from the research process. So it's not only the methodologies that we focus on, but the research process and its parts, which include, the questions and how do we decide what questions we ask when we are researching? How do we decide on where we are going to focus our research gaze? And what is the impact of our research? There are clear patterns to this. Some questions get to be asked more than other questions, and some topics get to be highlighted, others not. So in order to so we need to really think about these issues, not only the techniques of and the method when we think of decolonize. The second is a note on the politics of knowledge production. So it's not only knowledge production, the politics of it. What I mean by the politics of knowledge production is to focus our attention not so much on the technical ways in which our knowledge of the world gets constructed, whether through observation, for example, surveys, interviews, experiments in laboratories, but on the key point that ideologies, agendas, material interest, and situated viewpoints are also always central to how this knowledge gets constructed. Well, to talk about the politics of knowledge production often involves looking behind the official clean, sanitized stories about science and research, and to ask hard questions about who is constructing this knowledge, for what purposes and agendas, or with what interests at stake. And along with this, how are these political interests and agendas shaping what kinds of knowledge are being produced and what kinds are ignored? What perspectives are being prioritized and which ones are being sidelined? There are fundamental questions that enable us to be critical readers of knowledge claims that are presented to us, whether by researchers or politicians or the media, so that we evaluate and judge these claims rather than taking them for granted and assuming they must in fact be true. Well, to start thinking about decolonizing through the politics of knowledge production, I want to take the example of research on refugees in Lebanon, focusing in particular on shifts over time on how researchers have constructed knowledge claims, initially about refugees from Palestine, and more recently, refugees from Syria. I want to share my own stories of observing some of this research in action over the past few decades from my home of Beirut, Lebanon. And I start now with the first part, which is researching the Palestinian refugees. Are you a social researcher? the 7 to 9 years old Shatila kids used to ask me, no. Are you a journalist? No. These were questions that kept repeating from a group of 7, 10 years old I started working with in Shatila. The longer I stayed, the more these questions were asked. Then why do you keep asking these? I finally asked. And the answer was because all those who come to the camps are either researchers or journalists, people who want to do research and ask questions. Shatila, in the late 90s, a camp that was isolated still from Lebanon and open to foreigners coming to study the camp with its history of wars and massacres. Most researchers came from US universities, and most of them sympathized with the Palestinian cause. They were activists who became aware and conscious of the Palestinian plight through the Right of Return campaign in the US campuses back then. The 90s were bubbling with Palestinian movements in universities. It was also the Oslo Accord and the peace process with the questions of the refugee on the table of the negotiations. It was a time when the Palestinians in Lebanon were actually turned into refugees after they were referred to as freedom fighters and revolutionaries during the Palestinian liberation movement. The camp was then isolated from the city, a city that has started to think of the civil war and tried to move on. And moving on meant forgetting the Palestinians. A combination of the peace process, the massacre, and the right of return movement turned Palestinian refugees, especially Shatila camp, into an over-researched community in the 90s. It stayed till the second intifada. Research was conducted by not only academics, but by international organizations and NGOs and all sorts of researchers. The high demands of research in the camp created a web of relations centered around the NGOs, the Popular Committee, which is a governing body in the camp, and the research and the researcher. So to get access to the camp, researchers needed a sponsor, which was usually the NGO, who facilitated the permission of entrance to the camp and access to the research, who are mostly the clients of the NGOs. In return, the researchers help with the NGOs with proposal writing, some translation, and access to funds. Slowly, the Shatila residents started to complain about the NGOs and the research invasion. There was an invasion of researchers, this is how they used to call it. And some started to work as gatekeepers, play somehow the role of the NGOs. Some also started to work on translation of the interviews and transcription. Some labor was created out of the over-research in the camp. The topics were mainly focused on the Nakba, or the Palestinian catastrophe after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, which created consequently the Palestinian refugees. And the ongoing Nakba now then in the camp. So it is the 48 as a turning point for the creation of the refugee question, and then the conditions of the refugees, which were dire, a community stripped of its civil rights in Lebanon, and with less funds from the UN. The refugee life was constructed by the refugees as a series of Nakbas or catastrophes. The questions also asked constructed certain subjectivities that resolved around the Nakba. The Shatila residents are now the refugees, the miserable refugees with no hope in sight, the abandoned refugees by all the world. End of 90s witnessed rise of new forms of research. People didn't stop coming to do research in Shatila, but the methods changed. So that it's like, they moved from the qualitative research of asking interviews to starting to do participatory research. And participatory research at this time became widely spread among progressive Western PhD students and scholars, because they wanted to give back to the camp or to the communities they are studying. So the first encounter with the participatory research was through a researcher on public health. Through an NGO, she got access to young refugees to teach them and learn together, like participatory research, about a topic. That topic was HIV/AIDS. in the early 2000s. The researchers explained how they will learn together and how it is a democratic process and it will be a community learning and so on. She had brochures from the WHO and other organizations that were used in Africa about HIV/AIDS. To her surprise, the student did not didn't turn out back the second session and refused to be part of the participatory research. Then the researcher disappeared for a while. When she came back, she asked the NGO to gather some women for her to start a 3-month participatory research. The topic was this time on the menopause. Menopause in Arabic is sin al-yas. If you want to translate it to English, it literally means the age of despair. Okay, sorry, it's like really, but it's like, you know, the age of despair. And so the NGO, basically the NGOs gathered women before, you know, they asked for young people. They brought in women who are client for the NGO. So they have like scholarship from the NGO, they get some money. And she gathered them and she started to talk about the age of despair, sin al-yas. And so one of the women said like, okay, it's 48. So the researcher told her, oh, 48, yeah, some women have their age of despair at different ages. And another woman, she told her, no, all the Palestinian, either 48 or 67. So 67 is the other displacement of Palestinian. And the researcher wasn't like knowing what was going on. So I stepped in, I said, I think there is here like 2 kinds of despair we are talking about. They are talking about the political despair and you are talking about another kind of despair. Maybe you need to explain what sin al-yas for you is. And she then explained that, you know, this is a time when the women, you know, don't have their period anymore. And there was so much uproar in the camp and among the women, like, you know, who the hell appoint you to come and work with us on this? You want us to focus on our bodies? And they started to tell stories like, well, you know, I lost my period, I thought I was pregnant, nobody cares for this, whatever. They cursed her and cursed the people, the NGO who allowed her in, and it was like an uproar. So I thought like this was the end of it and she wasn't coming back. But then actually the NGOs asked the woman to keep on the participatory research, and they gathered them again, and it was like tortures, you know, making them sit to listen to her participatory research in order to create, to collect data. So anyway, so when the census, so here, like, you know, and there is a shift from research to participatory research, but participatory research itself became like a metaphor, an empty rhetoric for those who wanted to be radical and progressive. Questions were imposed and topics were picked by the researchers. The process is even more tiring, with people having to attend 3 months. It's not like you do an interview and go because you are teaching, then it's like you have to go each session and you are obliged to do it because you are client to the NGO. And then, you know, in the HIV/AIDS story, the researcher attributed the lack of interest and revolt among the young people in the camp because of the conservative culture. But it was mostly because there were no cases of HIV/AIDS, zero. Like there was 0 cases of HIV/AIDS in the camp. So like, you know, and no need to torture young people learning about it for a few months while the researcher was collecting the data. It's not like because it's conservative culture, it is more because there are no cases, no interest. The menopause stories tells a lot about how when we come with a preset of ideas and questions of what we want to do, even though it's called participatory research, but it was, you know, some stories from the researchers coming. We miss on asking questions. It was only when I went to do my PhD a few years after that I learned about a study in Japan with peasants who declared they were not aware of menopause. And the researchers and the book argued basically how menopause is constructed, and it's constructed by the pharmaceutical. So like, you know, I was like thinking, oh, that woman, that researcher in Shatila could have really done a great a breakthrough by discovering that, you know, menopause is constructed, but she insisted on imposing her own ways of teaching them how they, that changes about their body and so on and so forth. So later on, Shatila became overstudied. By 2012, there was more of 1,000 academic paper on the camp in Arabic, French, and English, around 100 books and thousands of reports and media articles. The solution of this over-research was a decision to move to other camps, creating the same set of relation, asking same question, and new fashionable ones in academia, such as governance, using, of course, a Gambian state of exception, and imposing questions around that on the other camps other than Shatila. Well, time passes and the Syrian refugee crisis started. Syrian Palestinians came to live with Palestinians in Shatila. Those who were complaining from being over-researched felt abandoned, and there was some resentment over the shift to studying Syrian refugees, not Palestinians. Syrians became the new refugees, the cool ones. They were better for attracting funds, and NGOs loved them. International organizations shifted much fund to help the Syrian refugees. Researchers justified the resentment of Shatila residents, the Lebanese Palestinians, by sticking a national identity that there is no solidarity between the Palestinians in Syria and Lebanon. Some even declared the death of national identity, and they discovered that 60 years in Syria, 60 years in Lebanon had made Palestinian in these two countries different. Oh, wow, like, you know, you need a discovery to, like 60 years affect, of course, the, you know, the identity of people. No one asked or reflected on how poverty creates resentment. When poor people are faced with other poor people sharing resources, they start to resent each other and feel jealous, fight for resources. Perhaps it has nothing to do with solidarity or Palestinianness, but the refugees were labeled as such and had to bear the consequences of it. And all their behavior arrayed against this identity. But more than that, the Syrian refugees became the center for the research industry, new research industry. The Palestinians were the old refugees now. The Syrians became over-researched perhaps much quicker than the Palestinian refugees. The process and the relation between them and the researcher is not the same as that of Palestinians. It's not anymore the solidarity of the individual anthropologist looking for the miserable life. It is now the age of big data, the age of large funds for research from the EU, mostly. Accordingly, there are different coalitions and conditions that created this industry of studying Syrian refugees. The refugee crisis and the money the EU was pouring to keep the Syrians away, the changes in the university structure with pressure on staff to produce more and to get big grants, and with promotion depending on quantification of activities. There is also the commercialization of the postgraduate education and the endless army of MA and PhD holders in Lebanon who were available to do the labor of research. Between 2015 and 2020, there are 48 million pounds were spent to study Syrian refugees in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey alone. Most of the fund is coming from the GCRF as part of the UK policy to shift aid money to research and to link also research to the foreign policy. My university have two of these big grants, one for 7 million and the other one for 5 millions, one only in Lebanon and the other one in Lebanon and Jordan. I mean, like, why do you need 7 million pounds to study Syrian refugees? The structure now is different. Instead of local NGOs, there are local universities, the Lebanese American universities and American University of Beirut. Most of the developed money shifts to universities. And there are conditions from the aid, the EU and UK, like DFID, is to find a local partners, like local university partner to operate. Then the local universities subcontract to researchers who deal with the NGOs, and you go back to the same circle of clientelism found in Shatila. NGOs and gatekeepers or fixers from the camps, translator are mostly Lebanese here. Topics are about governance, rise of the refugee and the city, much on education, public health, and of course, women and harassment and domestic violence. While Syrians were always in Lebanon as laborers, construction and agriculture, you can barely find anyone working on Syrian labor in Lebanon. Same for Palestinians who work in agriculture and construction for decades, but most of the research is not on like this topic. Here it becomes funders and funded relation, and you see the rise of the exploitation of intellectual labor and the alienation of in the production of research, with contracts that looks like the maids contract in Lebanon that we call modern day slavery. Full employment, everything produced is owned by the university that is funding the project. The research assistants are asked to choose sites, collect data, interview and do literature review, write extensive field notes, analyze, transcribe, translate, and they have no right to use the data for anything of their own. These are conditions from the contracts. I analyze the contracts of the research assistant. The Syrians who are interviewed and whose stories are shared have no idea there is a contract that defines the relation between the researcher and the PI. It becomes another form of colonialism where there is an extraction of stories from somewhere to be owned somewhere else. Funders in London were talking even about creating a huge bank of data in which all the funded research could be collected in this huge data bank. But of course, you know, the people who are researched have no aware of this. There are also issues of labor and labor exploitation and alienation. This is mainly the research assistants collecting the data. They work down the hour, they get paid nothing, they are alienated from their labor as they don't know if they are selling it to the researchers. This is all wrapped in something called intellectual property rights. Whoever funds owns. Laws have been put in place for this. Local universities are asked to change the laws in order to abide by the IP laws. There is a change in intellectual labor, knowledge production workers, and there is a new division of labor when it comes to knowledge production. So it's not only, the academics are not even going to collect the data themselves. There are an army of young people who are unemployed and who are, you know, waiting for the researchers to hire them. What do these stories about research on refugees in Lebanon tell us? What can we learn from them about the politics of knowledge production and decolonizing research? While there are many different issues we could talk about here, I want to highlight 3 key points. The first, that when we think to decolonize through looking at the politics of knowledge production, we have to think about decolonizing categories created by researchers and by UN and states. These politics of knowledge production don't just shape how certain categories of people are spoken about and understood in the world, but also work to produce social categories in the first place. So that the issue for us is to investigate and understand is not just how Palestinian or Syrian refugees are described and portrayed at different points in time by different kinds of researchers, though this of course is very important, but decolonizing means pushing us to question the ways in which the very category of refugee is constructed as the dominant category for understanding who these groups of Palestinian or Syrian are in the world. As I have described in these stories, the promotion of one social category often involves the hiding or obscuring of other categories. This phenomenon happens all the time. Another example is the category of youth. this didn't used to be a very important category in the Arab world, or indeed in much of the world. But today we find the category of youth, like the category of refugee, being used everywhere. We also need to recognize that through the construction of these dominant social categories, knowledge production does not shape how we understand the world, but how we exist and act in the world. For we find all kinds of resources and programs and policies that are tailored to the refugee or the youth and so on. Knowledge production helps to shape and then colonize the world we live in. A second key point is that we need to think of research and knowledge production as an industry. And this is like where decolonize should be focused. So just like there are industries that produce cars or flags or computer, there are industries that produce knowledge. As an industry, we need to always follow the money, to ask where is the money coming from that produces some kinds of knowledge and not other. Who is investing this money and why? What are their interests and agendas and ideology? We also need to ask about the employment relation within this industry. Who is actually doing what work in producing knowledge? What are the relationship of power, status, control, wealth, and income? Where are the conflicts, tension, and resistance? How does this shape the kind of knowledge that are being produced? And then, like, the colonial ways of knowledge production. Further, we need to ask about the relationship of industry to surrounding communities and the environment. Just like manufacturing industry can have both positive and harmful impacts, creating jobs, opportunities, creating pollution, and so on, so too can be the knowledge production industry. And we have seen this in the stories of Shatila. Finally, there is the question of the broader public and social impact of knowledge production and research. Ideally, we want research and knowledge production to help us create a better world than the one we live in now. In the stories I have shared here, you can see how at different points in time, Palestinians and later Syrians, and in Shatila and elsewhere, are tired to work with researcher, or they try to work with researcher in the hopes that it will help them and their cause. And at other times, they have grown frustrated with researchers and stopped working with them because it has not seemed to have any real positive impact. When we think about impact, all of the points I have highlighted there are relevant. The ways that knowledge production produces dominant social categories that shape our life. The way that knowledge production industry has a wide range of impact on its employees and surrounding community. But if we want to decolonize, there are bigger questions we need to ask about the politics of knowledge production. We need to look, if you want to decolonize, we need to look closely at the global political economy of research and knowledge production. How are researchers linked to different states around the world, to different interests of capital, to political causes, communities, and social movement? How can and should these links be different? For what we very often find when looking at the research done in places like Shatila is that knowledge production is not being linked in the first instance to the Palestinian cause or to their movements and organization, but to the interest of other kinds of social actors in Lebanon, Arab region, wider world, and to the career of the researcher. If we want to transform the public impact of knowledge production, then we have to think about changing these kinds of connections. No decolonizing process can happen without thinking through these connections and the political economy of knowledge production, falling through fetishizing certain kinds of method and thinking that some method can be more liberating and other more colonizing is not the answer to decolonize. After all, there is not one method that can be oppressive in all settings and another that is liberating in all settings. What is needed is talking through the political economy of knowledge production, the questions we ask, and the unequal relation of power in which we are conducting research. Thank you. I finished.
Well, thanks so much for the talk and for the super interesting insights and the detailed history or stories, not history as well, but stories. Yeah, I would just immediately open up the floor to any questions people might have. Just use the raise hand button. Or Jeff is already raising his physical hand, which is also fine. So please. You're still muted, Jeff.
I think you muted us.
Sorry. If somebody properly did the silly hand raise thing, you can go first. I don't know, Wolfgang.
I don't think nobody did, so just go ahead and then.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. So I'm kind of stuck here, right? I mean, there's a problem of that we want to fix to decolonize the academy. And sort of your framework for getting at it, I mean, it's a political economy model. And, you know, I study political economy models in a very different context, having nothing to do with decolonizing the academy. It's looking at civil wars. And I look at those models and I say, God, they're super simple, they're inaccurate, and they don't really capture how the world works. Or only a little bit of it. And, you know, so you've got this political economy model. So the reason we've colonized is about the financing of knowledge base. It's not about ideas. I mean, this is knowledge, right? It's about ideas, certain embedded beliefs we have as scholars coming from the North or whatever. I mean, I just don't, I guess, I mean, so I have a skepticism of political economy models in general because I think they're a very simplistic way to look at the social world. And then when I started trying to think how you're using it to understand the colonization and possible decolonization of the academic world, isn't it giving us sort of a too simplistic set of solutions for decolonizing? Yeah, I guess that's my question. Thanks.
Okay. I understand where you are coming from about the simplicity of knowledge production. I don't use it only in financialization of research, but you know, there are consequences of the financialization of the research and the university, in the sense that we are creating knowledge and ideas that we keep on using, and these ideas and knowledge are not can be like not accurate and part of colonizing again. And so what I am talking about is not like, you know, I'm not saying that we should totally not have any fund for research, if this is what you are aiming at. It's not the case. I am talking about, you know, I'm just explaining the power relation and how research is set in our still colonialist way. Can you argue that it is not always like universities in the global north studying the global south? There are who are from the universities in global south studying global north, for example. These are things we need to talk about. I don't believe in decolonizing as just focusing on these ideas without focusing on the structure, which is the political economy, the structures in which these ideas are created. Because I can sit and talk, like, you know, as I said in my talk, like you can say, oh, we can fix the problem of interviews by jumping to participatory research, or now like there is the citizen scientist. But this is not a solution, because you are not really digging on the real question, which are like what is the bigger image or the macro image in which this whole knowledge is being produced, in which we are all part of. Like, okay, I can tell you from experience that I see my colleagues one after one shifting to study certain topics. Now the Syrian refugees, even though they have no knowledge about it, just because it is, you know, big grants and we are in a setting where we have to get grants in order to push ourselves in academia. So all these are important topics. I'm not saying that ideas are not important. I'm not giving a simple solution. All what I am saying is that when we are thinking about decolonizing, the issue of knowledge production get totally out of that picture. And I'm trying to say we need to start thinking about this, not only about about certain ideas, like, you know, like from the colonial time, the issues of, like, I can talk about minorities, the nation state, all of these ideas that were created by colonialism and for colonial reasons are still categories that we use. Maybe we should start like, you know, stepping back and think about what these categories are doing to our research and our understanding of the world. So I don't see it is two ways. There is nothing called knowledge production that is not connected to what to the ideas and knowledge and whatever is being produced. These are two processes that come together. And that's why I don't just talk about, you know, the financialization of the university. I talk about how the financialization of the university is acting on the community. So it's not like the old way of political economy is studying up, studying down, and sideways. I don't know if I answered you.
Yeah. Am I allowed to follow up, Wolfgang, or?
Yeah, you can. He said yes.
So, okay, I mean, that was a great answer. Thank you. But then sort of your answer ticked the box for the other part of political economies that sort of drives me nuts. They're too structural. Where's the agency of these, you know, global North academics, right? You sort of said at one point, well, you know, we dangle the funding and look, everyone's starting to, these structural idiots, right? That's us, right? You know, dangle the funding and we're all going to start studying Syrian refugees now.
No, you mean the agencies of the people we are studying, or the agencies of the researchers?
Of the researcher.
Okay, of the researchers, well, yeah, we do have agencies. We choose what we want to do, of course. Like, you know, there are people who don't fall into this trap. Other people are falling. I'm not saying everybody is the same, but there are categories. I am on a committee now about like fund in the university, and you, like, we are doing a survey, and you won't believe how much this I think maybe this is like British academia more, how much like people are saying they have to change their topics in order to get grant because this is the way you advance. Some people have, I have agency, they have agency, and they are choosing what they want to do. It's not like, you know, it is imposed on them. We choose what we want to do. Yes, there are structural issues. I choose not to get big grants because I don't believe in them. There are agency for the researchers, of course, like, you know, and I didn't include that in my talk, and the research they do sometimes exploit the researcher, and they say it like in plain ways that, okay, we know what they want to hear, we tell them what they want to hear, and you know, we please the NGO. So it's not like, you know, a structure and we are structured. There are agencies everywhere. We are choosing, but we are also product of a neoliberal universities. Like my generation, we are brought up in certain settings that even constructed us as academics.
I think Aruna just posted a question in the chat that's actually a nice follow-on that, and she's asking how would you suggest as how can the researcher kind of drive this change when we are dependent on the institutions where the money comes from? So Aruna writes, her research is on EU humanitarian aid, and of course she wants to create a better world where EU humanitarian aid benefits recipients first, not all the middlemen. If she would not have written her research proposal in a way where she proposed her contribution to lead to recommendations for EU policymakers, she probably and instead would have chosen to emphasize the underlying causes, her application would not have been successful, probably. So I guess the question is, how within these constraints, how can we as researchers, as possible field researchers, make the best out of it, or actually struggle for change?
a good example of agencies. People can, right? It's not like, people can manipulate the system. There are academics who can manipulate the system and write what the funders want, and then go and do whatever they want, and they produce good, like research that is anti the establishment. So it's not like, if you get the fund, you are going to produce research that is totally connected to the dominant ideas. It's not the case, but also it is something that we need to think about. How can we so this is part of the agency. The question was how can we
I guess within these structures, what can we do when we are kind of in need for the money?
There is a huge literature on humanitarian aid and critical literature on humanitarian aid. So instead of like just going and believing in humanitarian aid, we can read about what humanitarian aid is. And as I said, there is no one method or one research way of that is good for everything. It depends what she wants, what the questions are, and like for me, the compass is always justice. It's like, when I go and I find there are people who are being dealt unjustly, or there is whatever, over research, tiredness, exploitation, all these things. This is where I I start to decolonize my questions. Of course, being like starting by asking the critical question of humanitarian aid, like, so for example, let's take the humanitarian aid. So, okay, so like, for example, the EU is giving so much money, humanitarian aid to the refugees, right? But at the same time, and actually all the asylum petitions, asylum, what do you call it? Applications in France especially is based on humanitarianism. So it's not like your right as a person who is migrant. It is about like humanitarian ways of accepting asylum. So let's say let's say it's UK and the Syrian refugees. UK is involved in Syria, but it's still as in wars and still paid humanitarian money for the Syrian. So like, okay, so are we like what? So then we should ask questions about what is the role of humanitarianism here in serving, like who is it serving? Is the money serving UK? Is it serving the Syrian refugees? Is it serving the Syrian government? Like, these are the questions that we need to ask. I'm not saying we don't need to take money or we don't need to ask to do research. I'm not in any way into political, into identity politics, in the sense like, it's not like we can't go from the global north to the global south. There is nothing to do, like I don't come from this decolonized way. All what I am trying to say is that we need to ask about our role as academics in producing certain knowledge that serves not the communities we are serving, but other actors. So if she's going and doing humanitarian aid and she really cares about the community, then this is what is most important. Where is the impact of her research will be? Asking the questions in a way that is that helping the community she is studying. This is how I think about it.
Lillian, I think you had a comment on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of jump in, and so I'm being forthright that it's a comment first and not a question, but I'm just sort of thinking about my own research and my own kind of grant proposals. I study Palestinians in Jordan, not just refugees and not just refugees in camps, but at different points, I've also worked a little bit with Palestinians in Lebanon. So I completely see the points being made about over-research and the way that researchers can be directed to sometimes even the exact same actors within a camp, and or using the exact same research assistants, and they're, in this sense, it's
people.
It's part of this industry so blatantly, and it's hurting knowledge production, because if you're only interviewing the same voices and they're giving you the same stories, But my first comment on kind of maybe bringing in research or agency, and also maybe another way to approach how do we deal with the fact that funders want research that's policy relevant to EU actors, to US actors. I think that you can still be doing more ethical, thoughtful research and propose that in those applications. And in some ways frame that as innovative. You know, you're deconstructing how policies work, for example. Like now I'm just drawing on an example from my own grant proposals of saying, look, like refugee policies, we want to code them inclusive or exclusionary, or we want to look at laws because it's easier to track, but that's not how they operate in these contexts. And if you think that they operate that way, you know, the way that you're interacting with these host states, like, you know, you're not going to necessarily achieve your objectives. You know, they can change a law, they can say they're going to do this, and then they'll go and implement it however they want. And we need to understand these dynamics. And these are the types of things that maybe refugees themselves or other people who interact with these policies complain about, because they're supposed to be able to access this, and they go to the government office and they can't, you know? And so then I think proposing something like that, which is in some ways maybe at least addressing more of a reality on the ground. I'm not always sure how much my research helps the communities I work with. That's something I always struggle with, but you know, that's something then that a funder might say, oh, like we're absolutely missing something. Yeah, I want to know what's going on, and yeah, I'll fund you. And then you don't even have to pretend that you're going and doing a certain type of research. So I think this assumption that we have to cater to some narrative of the right kind of research, I don't think that's always true. It's just
also there are different kinds of funds, of course, like not all funds are the same. I was focused on the ones that come from GCRF, from like, you know, the huge fund. I mean, like, why do you need millions of dollars to study refugees? Like £7 million to study the health sector in amongst the Syrian refugees, and to discover that they have no health, public health, you know, organization. You can build these £7 million can solve the problem of public health in the camps, right? So I'm not discussing like the small grants that are more academic, and then, you know, you can like, you know, they can be innovative. I'm talking about like these huge big grants that are now the N in academia, like 5 million, I don't know how many millions. It's just like, at the end of the day, do we really need that much money to produce to do research? And then does this much money make our research better? This is another question. Like, is it a question of money, and money can it do, like, you are doing research by yourself, you can take grants and so on, but you know, and then, you know, so now, like, you know, when you have big grants, it have to be multi-sited, and the sites are created just because you have friends here and there. You know, this is really, no, I'm really serious. I'm doing research on this. You know, you can find something like they are doing, like one of the 5 million ones is doing social cohesion in the Bekaa Valley and in Kenya and in Peru. Like, I don't really understand like what joins this. When I asked the PI, she said, because it was my connection in these places. So this is how it has been created. So I'm not in any way saying that it is only about knowledge production and we don't have agency, but I'm saying that this kind of shedding light on how of the political economy of knowledge production has been totally absent from the decolonizing research. We focus on techniques, we focus on shifting methods, we focus, but we're not focusing on, you know, asking the question about the impact, about, you know, our role, how we are embedded in the financialization of research ourselves. That's it. Thank you. This is a great response for my questions. Yes, for Jeff's question. I need to dash, by the way.
Will you come back?
If you want to talk alone, I don't mind.
No, please, please do come back.
Yeah, I leave and come back.
Perfect, that's it. Lillian, did you have another comment as well?
Oh, I was just going to kind of ask about.
Okay.
So no, it's a little bit unnecessary, but it's around the idea of research, like having I realized that in some cases, and this wasn't limited to say refugee camps, could be on other topics, but multiple people who were writing their dissertations and so citing interview research, they had just contracted out the same person to do them. And so it was really like this one person was out doing all of these people's interviews. And I mean, this is for their dissertation. So I was kind of surprised because I know that, later on in scholars' careers, it's harder to get to the field and whatnot. Maybe they had their reasons, but the way that they were kind of framing their data was not so explicit that they weren't even there. They weren't even in the country when these interviews were being conducted. And that was just something that I was kind of going to raise as whether this was a new phenomena or not, I guess, of sort of like this outsourcing of the research, and even for dissertations. It was just, or if it was something other people had heard of or come across.
Yes, I came across this. This is like part of what I'm following now, and it's really like I can tell you researchers who, first of all, they don't know the language. This is part of why knowledge production is like political economy is really important here, because when there is fund and you can get fund, so like they don't know the language. They never worked on refugees or know the Syrian topic. They just jumped on it. Okay, what happens is that you go one time, or you don't have to go even. You can connect with a UB professor and they hire. At the end of the day, you get all the data to your desk. You don't know that, as I said, like in the contracts, I wish I think I have one of the contracts I can send to you, and then you can share it with the group maybe. And then the contract says that this is what you need to do. I interviewed like 40 research assistants in Lebanon. I still do interviews with them. Some of the PIs go one time, 2 times, or they don't even go to the site, or sometimes they go one time because they want to say that like they feel they have been there. So when they are talking about it, they want to feel that they are there. And so this is like this is the kind of these are the kinds of questions that don't get to be asked when we are not focused on the knowledge, on political economy of knowledge production, when we don't include labor, when we don't include, the money that gets spent and how this shapes our questions, and so on. We do have agencies. I know so many good people who are, playing their games, but taking funds and so on. But it's just it's something that we really need to put when we think about decolonizing. It's not like something we can think about. And yeah, so it becomes like political tourism. You just go one time and see, and the people send you the data to your desk, and then it's owned by you and the university, the funders, and other people have no idea that their stories are owned. I own your story. That's cool.
And add to that the camp tourism of like taking that researcher, the one time they come on the tour of the camp. And that is just like, there's just so many disturbing elements to the way research is being done on refugees today. But I think this talk also points out that it's not necessarily new. But anyway, I'll be quiet.
Thank you.
Caitlin, you had a point before, so?
Yeah, hi Mayssoun, thank you so much for your presentation. These conversations are quite new to be happening at EY, and it's just so wonderful to have your input, and yeah, really brilliant. Thank you so much. Loads of various points that I wanted to, let me try and make a little, connect them. I wanted to point out on this issue of the agency of researchers. I think it's been really interesting to see in the UK context. I was trained in the UK, so I'm a bit more familiar with the funding environment there than in the European context, but UK not being in Europe. But I think there has been quite a big change in the emergence of grants that now require there to be a co-I in the country where the research is taking place. to try and move away from having these sort of centralized research projects only sort of housed in UK institutions, and that there should always be an active partnership with academics in the country where the research is being undertaken. And my understanding is that that push has come from, it's kind of developed in quite a bottom-up way from academics increasingly saying, actually, if I'm going to do this work, I have to have a co-I here, and a big part of the budget has to go here. Then there are all kinds of problems with that. I also work in Palestine, proving your point very well about over-researching in Palestinian communities for sure. But I work in Gaza, and it's really difficult to partner with academic institutions in Gaza with UK government research funds because of their assumptions around Hamas control or authority or oversight in academic institutions, for example. So there are all sorts of kind of, it goes back to this thing of that, you know, even when grants come with them with these ideas of saying, oh yeah, great, let's make sure you will have a co-I in country. Oh no, but not that country, sorry, and not this one either, because, you know. So so yeah, some kind of evidence of change perhaps, but then also just pointing back to the sort of structural pieces of this that are less in our control. Then on the issue of research assistance, yeah, I mean, this was one of the second piece of your work that was shared with the group today, was also focusing in on this, and just such a huge issue. And I think it's something, I trained in anthropology, and it's something that's only come to light in probably like max the last 10 years that people have started talking about, you know, why do we never talk about research assistants in anthropology? I mean, do we really believe that these people just go to the field and, you know, who is a key informant, who's an interlocutor, and who's actually doing the work for you? And where's the kind of transparency and all of that? So definitely a really important debate. And then also something that just doesn't get brought in. It's not only that we don't write about it and it's not transparent in the way that people write up their work, but there's also, it can be difficult to argue for funding for it because you're sort of expected to be the expert who can go and do this work alone. So yeah, maybe something to discuss there. And then maybe finally just to say, I think all of this, for those of us who are based at institutions in the global north and are trying to work to do better and to challenge some of these structures, it's really learning in progress. It's work in progress on our part, and there's no sort of one way to do this right. As you were saying, there's no sort of easy fix to undoing the decades and decades of you know, the colonized nature of knowledge production, as it were. But it's just so important that we keep having these discussions, I think, and sharing best practices, if you like, or things that seem to be working, things that definitely don't work, and trying to get sort of ongoing feedback on our own efforts to do this work better. And I'll stop rambling now. Thanks.
Can I just comment one thing about what you said? Like, the story of Gaza is really also, is like in your face, how our research, how our gaze is directed, where the fund, it becomes like, you know, these countries are part of where the UK interest is, like especially with the GCRF, which is a huge grants now for refugees. You know, it is partly if you find researcher, but it's also partly because it's development money that shifted to research. Now, if you want to ask me, like, how is researching the refugees going to keep them away? I have no idea how they came up with the idea, but tying, like, you know, the development aid money to foreign policy from one side, and then to and funding it to research. First, the issue of the copy-I is partly because also, like, people at Beirut, like, were saying, why should I do the work for someone just to get the money for my university? I want to be copy-I. But also it is a condition from the aid, because the aid, if you think about like aid, like NGOs before, you always have to have a local partner for that, you know, it goes to someone local. So the universities now are taking the role of NGOs in aid, right? So this is like part of the new logic of how development money is going to research. And this is the cycle that is going. And then, of course, our gaze is now tailored to where, you know, development aid want to be. And it is already, like, in the documents, the new document of GCRF, they say it like bluntly. It is part of the foreign policy. It's linked to UK foreign policy. I think they are stupid, honestly, and I don't think it is a conspiracy or anything, but it is affecting the way we are doing research, because I don't think if you study the refugees, you are going to know how to keep them in Lebanon or Syria or whatever. These people are throwing themselves in the sea because there is no prospect there. So studying them and bringing data is not going to help in any way, keeping them away. So it's okay. We can spend the money they want. So.
Thanks. Marius, you had a point before?
Yeah, I have, I guess, a couple of comments followed by a point, followed by a question. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, doing the reading, what really struck me was the fact that, you know, we have known about it for such a long time. You know, I think the passage from in one of the papers that you in one of your papers that you quote someone is, I think, from the 1950s or 60s. You know, and about the rite of passage for anthropologists going to a Native American village or something. I think the joke is that, you know, how does a Native American household look like with one family, 8 anthropologists? And it's like, so we've known about this for such a long time, and yet I'm just wondering, you know, it's not that much has changes. I mean, I guess maybe what Caitlin just said. I mean, maybe there's some recently there's been some like steps forward in that regard, but still it seems like we knew about this about this issue, about this problem, and yet this is not being talked about. And perhaps, I mean, you know, perhaps the problem also is the fact that students are not being taught that at the university. You know, we're not discussing this maybe, you know, often enough, simply. You know, I mean, I think this is hugely important that you know, this session today about decolonizing fieldwork, and I think this relates to a lot of us work, and not only those who are doing actual physical field work, but those who are conducting survey experiments or different types of experiments, I guess, in the field or overseas. But then it also got me thinking, I need to be careful here because my advisors are in the room, but I'm thinking about, you know, about the role of sort of gatekeepers at university and the department. So if you know, students often look for advice and for direction and stuff, and like, you know, yeah, of course we, you know, I think students can come up with crazy ideas of, as you said, like, you know, oh, one of the students, you know, wants to go to Kenya, and then wants to go to Uganda, and then wants to go to somewhere to South America just because she's got connections there. Well, maybe I'm just thinking, maybe the role of the department or of the advisors will be like, look, listen, let's think about, you know, some more ethical considerations here, not just access to the field. I mean, I'm just wondering, what's your opinion about it? What everyone's opinions about it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, can I tell you, like, with from the 50s, what happened with anthropology, if you want the history, in the 70s, they introduced what we call, you have to apply for ethical approval in order to go to the field. So they tried to avoid the problems of what the anthropologists used to do before by introducing this, what we call the university ethics. So before going to the field, I don't know if it is the case in your university, but we are obliged to fill in, like, you know, ethical application. It has to be read by people, and then it can be approved. So this, like, you know, this is what changed in the 70s, and it got to be, you know, a must in all universities. But what happened is that these ethics, the ethical application, they don't focus on the type of questions we are talking about. What they focus about is that how you don't exploit the people you are, if they are vulnerable. So it's like, you know, women, children, how you deal with them, your positionality, giving them consent, and so on. But this is not decolonizing in the sense of in the sense we are talking about it. Maybe it made people aware of power relations between researched and researcher, but it didn't help ask the bigger questions about our position in the university itself and what we produce. So this is what changed from the university. And then you know, now you can just like say whatever in the ethical approval and go do whatever you want. I know like one anthropologist, like the problem was this focus on positionality and power, anthropologist in Burj al-Barajni camp in Lebanon. I mean, she went to study the camp, and then in her introduction, I read it after, and then she was like talking. Do you know the Kedze novel? I forgot the name. It's The Barbarian, maybe, or he has a novel in which he is an oldest white man in love with a not teenager, like 18 years old Black South African, so both South African. He's white, older, and she is. And then in the whole novel, he's describing how even though they are in love, he still can feel that he is raping her because she's younger, she's Black, blah, 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 all these power relations. And she started to talk about, she took passages from this novel and started to talk about how she felt she is raping the Palestinian, her interviewees, the people in the camp, the same way Kedze felt, because she has power, she comes from Columbia University and so on. But you know, when I read, this is part of like positionality, and this is how we got over the power relation, by just like talking psychologically or getting our guilt out on papers. And the more you feel, the more you claim or you talk about your power and denounce your power, the more radical you are, to an extent that this woman had to get like, you know, this image that she is raping the community. I mean, if someone is feeling that they are raping the community, why are they still doing the research with the community there? Just like stop like this psychological burst out that I don't believe in this. We all have power. We can use the power the way we want. We can direct it in passionate way. We can direct it to ask questions that are connected to justice. I'm not saying we shouldn't do research. We should do research, but also like, you know, the solution to these ethical issues of over-research or of like global south, global north is not to do more research from global north to the global south, but to keep questioning what we are doing and why we are doing what we are doing, and how is that connected to the bigger political economy and structure. And like, you know, when we talk about impact, like now, I think Caitlin said she is in UK University, knows about the impact, and we have to apply for impact stories. And the impact stories are all about how our research impact policies. When it impact policies, it means like we are directing our research to impact, to justify certain policies that we know are against the people we study most of the time. It's not like we can still study, but we flip our impact about how is it impacting a different way of thinking about things. I'm not into activism. I mean, I'm an academic, but I don't want to save anyone or the community I am studying or whatever. I don't have guilt in doing research at all. And I don't want to save or be activist, but I want also to produce knowledge that is shifting the way we think about the world and the way we do research. This is how I think about it. So it changed by introducing these institutional ethical approval that can do nothing. And with the post-colonial term, it becomes all about the individual. Oh, my guilt, I am guilty, I have power. Okay, have power, and then use your power to do good things. Don't use it for to tell me you are guilty. If you feel you are raping the community, get the hell out of the community you are studying. That's it. I mean, like, I have no tolerance for these things, and it becomes like all, and I am a woman of color, I am white, I don't care what your color is. It's like about the ideas. It's not about this identity politics, which is all what decolonize is about. I shut up. Okay.
Fascinating. Sorry. Tina, you had a point.
I think Jeff also.
Let's have Tina first, if she hasn't spoken.
Sure, thanks. And thanks a lot for creating the space and for sharing these experiences. I agree that it's really needed, particularly in an environment like the UI. And I don't know that much about the UK environment. I'm a bit more familiar with the European funding, which is where most of my research has been funded from. And something that did not directly come up here, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on it, is the degree to which a certain level of mobility and precarity is embedded into a lot of the research funding that we get. So I think we've been speaking mostly about researchers from the north going to conduct research in the south. And that's also, I mean, a product of a number of reasons, including the political economy. But in my experience in the research groups that I've worked with, the times in which I had colleagues from the global south coming to do research here, there were just so many incredible obstacles in the amount of time that they could spend here, in the visas to get them here, that at one point we just all were completely exhausted and worn out and decided to just move the whole setting of the research or the meetings somewhere else because we couldn't get the people here. And so it was just easier for us to go to Zimbabwe or work it the other way around. So obviously we're like, as researchers, we're also just part of a more general system that puts different constraints. And then particularly tied to the EU funding, it's also built on the idea that to foster excellence, we need to move around and change country and change setting, which is something that constantly uproots people, regardless of how privileged and how guilty you feel about getting this incredible grant. That means that most of the very dedicated and good researchers that I know end up mostly out of necessity or convenience doing research on communities or on situations that they do not intimately know well, because they don't get funding to research where they grew up or what they are most familiar with. So this is also something that is to some extent embedded, I think. So I just leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah, this is like part of us being flexible, flexible academics, like flexible citizens. In neoliberalism, you have to recreate yourself all the time. So it's not like you have an intellectual project that you can follow passionately. You are passionate about it, and whatever. You're always asked to be recreating your identity and be a flexible, and then check what is out there. So this is like connected to the political economy. And yes, there are like, there is one case here when one Palestinian from Gaza, funnily, who couldn't come here even though they did all the research, but they couldn't come here to present. So because the Israelis couldn't let them to pass and to even apply for a visa. They couldn't because there was restrictions. So there are all these things that we can go, but they can't come. So this is all going back to the political economy. It's a great point. But also, yeah, we look like, yes, we have agency on how we can play around the grants, but we lost our agency in having an intellectual project that we are really passionate about. Because if we want to keep following where the money is, and then it becomes like a way of recreating ourselves, and it's really tiring. I know like so many of my colleagues who you can apply for so many grants all the time, and you spend so much time. At the end of the day, the success rate of the grant is not that high. So you keep ending like writing proposal after proposal, you might not get them. And once you get one, it becomes like an empire. You can keep on getting other funds. So it is even unequal, the way that research funds are set. Once you get one big one, okay, second, third, it becomes really easy. So it's all an equal relation within the academy, global south, global north, who get to go where, and the demand from us to be flexible and reinventing ourselves and our ideas at all points. And then, how much can you learn? Like, knowing about a subject, if you really have an intellectual project, takes years and years of getting deep and deep into it. Like I know, like if I look at my dissertation now, I laugh at it. At that point, it was what I know, and it was a good one. But now, like thinking about it, how I wrote it, I developed so much in my thinking. I can't, and then I'm writing something that is totally different from my dissertation, but based on it, because I accumulated knowledge, and it's my intellectual project that I have been pursuing for the past 8 years. But like, if I am asked to jump every few years to a different topic, I won't be digging deep, and I won't be asking the critical questions we want to ask, or I won't be decolonizing the way we want to decolonize, right? So it's all like a circle.
Julia, did you have a point before? Did you raise your hand? Oh, okay. Then
I have many questions, but no points to make.
You can also pose questions. Lilian, did you raise your hand?
I was just going to add, because I was thinking that from my perspective, being mostly in American institutions, and the way that at least some of my colleagues have operated with funding is that once you get that tenure track academic job, you get startup funds, and that allows you to keep pursuing your kind of more the project that you're intellectually passionate about and that you know a lot about, and you can build on. And that got me thinking about the links to the precarity of the academic industry itself, where if you can't access a job like that, then you have to be trying to access these big pots of money, and that you can't tailor them to your own research agenda. And so it just kind of struck me that there's many aspects of the academic knowledge production industry at work here, and not to make it overly structural, particularly for Jeff's sake, but it just struck me that that's also part of the problem, is when you can't be based in an institution and then get funding for what you want to do, then it also adds to this dilemma.
You can't even apply for grants if you're not affiliated with a big institution, right? It becomes like a vicious circle. And then, of course, yeah, it's like if you are most of the grants are by you know, when you are a professor or higher level, and you can get big grants, but and then the junior researchers are now asked all the time to apply for grants. They don't get them. They spend so much time. It's so stressful, and it's totally unequal the way it goes. Or they can work like, you know, even the big professor can bring postdocs to work on the proposals. And I mean, it's okay to talk about structural issues because they are not, maybe I focus so much on them because it's not something that we talk about, but it doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't mean we can talk about other issues, but it's really important to shed light on all these precarities at different levels, about inequalities, about like inequalities, even like stratification of universities, because here all the Russell groups take most of the research funds. The Russell Group is like the Ivy League in the US, so there are 7 or 8 of them, and then most of the fund goes to them, and then the others like are fighting for a little bit of money. And then what happens is this is connected to fund you get from you produce, and then it's connected to how much the state can give you money, government fund. So the end of the day, what happens is that these Russell groups are taking the big grants and then producing, and then they get the state fund, not the other university. And you get like in stratification of universities and who goes what and so on. So yeah. So structural issues are important, basically.
Jeff, you had a comment?
Yeah.
A question?
No, I guess it's a comment, and I have to run after this. I'm sorry. I mean, this is fascinating. And I see from all the nodding heads, I think I'm a minority here. I just don't know. Oh, and Marius, you're fired, by the way, because you smoke. And it's my age. I don't know. First of all, are we talking about decolonizing academia, or about the agency of scholars to make choices to do good research? And, you know, hierarchies are out there always, right? and people do bad social science research always. So again, I'm older. I did my dissertation in the 1980s. Okay. I was shocked I was studying the Soviet Union. I was shocked that so many people claimed to know so much about that country and never went there. Okay. And they influence policy critically in America anyway, in bad ways. My dissertation was funded by the American Defense Department, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. My dissertation advisor was a consultant for the Central Intelligence Agency. I had to navigate, right, these hierarchies. I wanted to do a dissertation not about bombs and guns. I wanted to do a dissertation about how beliefs and ideas can shape world politics. And I did that, okay? I ended up having a zero relationship with my advisor. He almost punched me at one point. That's true. Luckily, he missed. And might have helped, actually, right? And I get it, you know, those hierarchies and that political economy I'm funding isn't like what somebody from the global South faces now. They're of a greater magnitude. But I was aware of that, right? At that time, the mid-1980s, I knew I had to make choices. I made some choices that pissed the hell out of my advisor. But okay, I guess, you know, he let me do the research. So I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, so I had some agency here, right? And I guess as a white person in wealthy North America, I had a lot more agency than a scholar from the global South would in a similar kind of situation. So it was easier for me to see and to overcome these power relations that were there. So, I mean, is that what we're talking about? I mean, so was I a part of Decolonizing Academy back in 1984 at MIT? I mean, MIT was such a bonkers straight place, right? I mean, they were supporting Americans' Cold War policy, right? Which I thought was a shit policy, right? And I went there because there was funding, right? So, you know, was I in my own little way decolonizing academy back then? I was just trying to navigate, you know, academic life and do a good piece of research. And I'm sorry, I do have to go because my next meeting is starting now. So it's really just a comment. I mean, you provoked me in a very positive way, right? I mean, this is fascinating, but I probably just too old and too much a part of the system to get my head out of it. But thank you very much. I mean, it was really interesting. I'm sorry, I really have to go. So don't even bother to answer my last question because I have to go. Thank you. Sorry.
I guess we can discuss it anyway, though, if we want to. But we can also go ahead, Mariusz, if you have a point. I don't want to react to that.
Well, I guess, I mean, now that I'm fired, I can say whatever I want. So, no, I mean, I think what Jeff is kind of getting at is relating to the debate we had 3 weeks ago during positionality. So we are aware of this power dynamic. We are aware of these inequalities. We are aware of those systems. We can kind of see them. We can conceptualize them. But how can we practically address them? How can we, you know, really try to change to change it? I mean, I guess my answer would be to highlight the importance of it, to really, you know, drill in the ethics and the importance of that kind of debates that we're having today into the research. But I mean, is this enough? How can we change this? How can we change the structures? How can we change the huge funding bodies and the whole economy of universities based on the fact that you need to secure big grants and you need to secure big funding in order to progress in academia?
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's a choice. I'm not saying we shouldn't get fund. How we change that? Like, you know, I'm not saying we have to be utopian. I am aware that we all need jobs, basically, and we are And I'm not saying that we should like totally refuse, but we can also question the research and funds and keep questioning the university way of promotion of like, you know, based on grants and quantifying our research. It's not like how good your research is, but how many outputs you have. I mean, it's not like, you know, there will be a revolution and we need to just change it all the time. We can keep on thinking about these questions. We can keep on raising these issues with the university. And like for me, I took a decision that I don't apply for big grants. And, you know, I am sexy for grant applications in here because I am from Lebanon. And you know, I always get approached and like, don't do anything. I don't want to do it because I don't believe that big money makes good research. You know, it's a question we ask and the way we go about the research, and that makes the research good. And I'm fine, I'm producing without having grants, but I'm also privileged again because I have there is no tenure here, but it's called like open-ended permanent position. So I can use the money from a little bit of research fund I have in the university. But the issue is, yes, these are structures we are living in. There is a financialization of the university. This financialization has led to a mess. There are all these, you know, we think those who are doing PhD are going to find it very hard to find permanent jobs because all the university depends on precarious labor now. You have to run after funds and so on. We can keep supporting those who are fighting against this, like, you know, supporting the postdocs who are on like arguing with the union against the temporary position, because, you know, you have to keep moving from one place to the other, questioning the importance of big grants. All this we can do as individuals in our own places, keep asking the big questions. And I'm not utopian and say like, you know, okay, we can't do this, we can't do that. No, we have to be realistic about our abilities. Asking good question is our role. That's how I think about it. So I don't know if I answered you, but there are, of course, like so many people with so many other suggestions better than me, but this is how I do it.
Julian, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just two things, and one is really just a question that has been bugging me a little bit. First of all, thank you very much for the interesting insights. Honestly, very nice to have this kind of discussions at UI. It's a bit loud out here. I hope you can understand me. The first thing is, I was a little bit wondering because I come from, like, I did my master's degree in a university that is not, let's say, that is very French, let's put it that way. And people there are not very scared of being very critical about structural things and being very open about the things they consider unjust in the world. And then now here at the UI, I feel that there's a very like we're very much like it's more of a let's say modern university in that sense, and a more globalized university, I feel, than the one I was before. And I have the feeling that here we're very much pushed to investigate things on the micro level, to kind of go you know, be look at smaller things, right? Like look at causality, do RCTs and so on and so forth. And I'm kind of wondering how this fits in with this kind of problem in academia that you're describing, that we're kind of stuck in the system of you know, running after grants, and you know, we're not allowed to ask the big questions because we're paid to ask the small questions. And I'm wondering, like, isn't there some kind of feedback loop between this kind of micro turn in political science and this kind of financialization of the university? And the second question is a more practical question that I have. It's about local partners, because really, I mean, on the one hand, I really sympathize with the statement you made that there's clearly some kind of issue with taking a big European or American grant and going to some more or less developed country and handing out money there to like data, like yes, this is obviously, you know, there are a lot of kind of power relation issues here. At the same time, I was doing fieldwork in Lebanon actually about a year ago, and I was alone because I didn't have any money and so on and so forth. And a lot of people that I talked to were like, so if you want to do research here and you have funding, why don't you employ us? And it's true, you know, because at the same time, you know, if I get these massive grants, or if I hope to get these massive grants, I mean, may as well, you know, share the cake with the communities we're working in, right? It's like there's also this, like I feel it's not, like I feel it's not all wrong, which opens an entirely new problem. Because I know, for example, for a fact that there's really at least in Lebanon, I know there's pretty much an industry of research centers who take money from grants, but then don't really do a lot. Just in order for researchers from big Western universities to be able to sign off the fact we have local partners, or whatever you want to call it. Like I'm just wondering, like there's so many different parts of to this picture, and I'm just wondering how to approach it as a young researcher. Like how do I choose my local partners? How should I make sure that this remains an intellectually honest relationship? How to address these kind of power dynamic issues? How to do all these things?
You can simply co-author. You don't have to make it about you. I'm not saying like you don't have to, like, use or like whatever, not use. I mean, employ local researchers to help you with the research you are doing. But it's instead of like, paying them pennies, like, you pay them per month, and there is a huge need for employment in Lebanon. There is so much exploitation. I was just sent a note yesterday that there is a big fund, and now they are talking about, okay, there is a collapse of the economy in Lebanon, so they want to give them 10,000 2,000 for 10 months, because they think that now the collapse of the economy, they can exploit Lebanese young people for that. This is wrong. The issue is not to employ research assistant. You can employ research assistant, but you can co-author with them instead of claiming that it is all your work and you did it alone, and you just paid them the money and that's it. So perhaps like co-authoring is a good practice, and it helps get over all these problems that I talked about. If they are producing so much field research, they are doing half of the research, and you are also like, of course, involved in the questions and so on. So co-authoring is a good practice. So it's not like don't employ, but also that's what I said, like think about the labor relation. Labor relation means you can employ people on fair labor, right? So employ and co-author with them, right? Even if you are paying them to collect the data, but they should be co-authored, put as co-authored. Now, this is one way of solving it, right? So it's not like the always way. And who said political economy, by the way, is only about doing big, big questions? You can look at the everyday life and then think about the macro. There is nothing either micro or macro. The good researcher is someone who studies up, down, and sideways. Studying up, like, thinking about, like, even if you are studying, let's say, a tiny community in Shatila, without thinking about, how, like, focusing only in Shatila without thinking about the relation of Shatila to different scales, if you want, Lebanon, Palestine, I don't know, UNRWA, whatever is involved in the question you are asking, then you are missing even on studying the micro. So there is nothing called either micro or either political economy. I think that Jeff was talking about the political economy in the old sense of political economy that doesn't really touch upon these everyday relations that include gender, ethnicity, class, all these things together, right?
And yeah, just to clarify, when with micro, like I didn't make myself clear. With micro, I didn't mean looking at small communities versus looking at the entire world. but was more thinking about the types of question we're allowed to ask. It's I just feel like we're being pushed to ask very tiny questions. Like,
also like
X causes Y. This is the kind of questions we're trained to ask.
Yeah, but we are, yeah, you have right, and then like for me, all research starts with a question. If you like, this is when you ask a question, you are directing your research. So if all research starts with a question, I better ask a question that I am passionate about. The research is a lonely process. You have to do it alone. If you're not passionate about it and really like have so much fire because you want to really, explore and understand, then it's going to be like a torture to finish it. So pick a question you are passionate about, and you can argue your way with your professors. I'm sure it's not like, arguing your way could be by doing so much more work and then coming up with a great idea, and then I think you impose yourself on everyone, on the grant people, and on your professor and everyone. So that's maybe I am not realistic here, but I think like, questions are the first important step of all research, and they need to be given so much attention. Yes.
I'll shoot. I mean, it's basically, I would also have one question on, which is, maybe it's the same. I mean, you answered it already, but it's kind of these best practices of working together with local researchers or research assistants. I mean, yeah, that the co-authoring is something I took away from that. And because it's personally a decision I have to make at some point soon, I was just wondering, like, if there are more, yeah.
You are cutting.
Hello, Wolfgang, can you hear us?
Hi, do you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Did you hear my question?
No, we need to start over.
Okay, sorry. No, it was just also on the research assistants and employing research assistants, kind of what are the best practices? I mean, you mentioned now co-authoring, but I was just like, if you have other best practices, that was kind of my question, where my question was going at. Because it's personally something I will have to figure out soon. So I was just wondering.
Like, yeah, it's mainly not exploiting and making people feel that they are also owners of. And then also, like, besides co-authoring, what happened with this grant application is that whoever does the research have no power in using it. You can use the data the way they want. They can use the data the way they want. You can write together if you want, or write each one alone. These are like good practices. And if you are working in Lebanon, don't do like what they are doing now. It's like paying them less than they used to pay them in pounds, because there is a total devaluation of the lira. So this is also kind of paying fairly, co-authoring, co-ownership of data. These are like good practices.
No, fair enough. It's literally collaborating, basically. Yeah. Do we have Caitlin? Yes.
Yeah. So something that I wanted to maybe raise was also on this idea of working with research assistants. Is it of ways of thinking about ways of thinking through? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, there's other calls in my office. The product of academic research, you come out with an article or your PhD thesis or a book or whatever, and this is really valuable academic currency, if you like. We need these products to advance our careers, and sometimes you work with research assistants who also want to keep going in the world of research, and this can also be useful to them. I've definitely had the experience myself of offering to co-author when I've worked with other people, and either having the response of, well, I wouldn't want to have my name on this because it's potentially dangerous, and or the answer of like, yeah, sure, but I don't really care. I mean, yeah, great, we can put both our names on it, but it really doesn't, this isn't going to change my life in the way that it's going to mean that you get a job, because I'm not trying to get a job in academia, or, you know. So I think there's also something about thinking through when you're working, when you're doing collaborative work, trying to think through with people what's a sort of equivalent, what are other ways that you can support them in the way that the product of this piece is going to support you and support your career, and are there ways that you can, you know, so something, for example, that has been much more useful to someone that I worked with was getting, so I was doing research in my postdoc at Harvard. I managed to get Harvard to issue a kind of a certificate, an official document saying that my colleague had worked on this project that was linked to Harvard University, and she found that much more useful for sort of advancing her own career and applying for future jobs than it was to say that she had co-authored a publication. So there's just to try and sort of think through with the people you work with as well, what would be meaningful to them, and what, you know, there's the ownership side of the data, which I completely agree with, and everything, but also just thinking through in practical terms, like what you get out of the academic research, and then trying to think with them what, you know, how could this also benefit them in other ways.
Yeah, I was thinking that most of the research assistants in Lebanon are like academics, or like projects of our academic. Like, so MAs want to pursue PhDs, right?
Sure.
But yes, for other people, like if you are doing NGOs, like NGO people doing the research for you or whatever, they don't, like, the fair pay is very important, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, giving them good, like, you know, like the money that they deserve if they are.
But it's both, right? Because it's like the labor, like payment for the labor and the time that the work is being done, but then also thinking through something that's more lasting than that, but something that's more lasting in a meaningful way.
But I was thinking about RAs that want to join academia, and then
sure.
They can also use data, some of them, even if they are not, like they can use it for writing articles in Arabic in newspapers and so on. It doesn't have to be in academia, but they are restricted now with contracts. They cannot use anything from, not even for journal articles, which is a pity, because then, you know, they can, you know, whatever the data collected can be used at different levels for academia and for general audience and in different languages. And why not? Like this idea of I own the data or whatever, it doesn't really fit with me. That's it. Sorry.
Marius, did you have a point before as well?
I guess I do. I don't know how much time we have for that, because I wanted to go back a little bit to kind of methodology and what you said about the production of social categories in particular. You know, I really like what you said about, you know, the research process and the decolonization process. How in research really decolonization starts with, like, not in the field or not in the writing part of a paper, but actually with the conceptualization of your project, and how are you going to actually execute it, what kind of questions you ask, and what kind of sites you use, and how you're going to execute it. So I mean, but then at the same time, I guess my question is, like, how can we avoid reproduction of those sometimes harmful social categories that are being, you know, that, like, you know, like in one of your articles, there was, you know, it was the example of the woman living in a household with, like, broken door, and researchers just kept coming back and looking for the, you know, we're looking for the awful things, we're looking for the sad things, for the bad things, and how the lives of refugees is terrible, and reproducing this narrative of well, you know, the certain narrative. And like, how can we, I mean, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but how can we avoid doing this?
There are answers. It's just like, so it's just like, you know, asking the different question, turning our gaze. Like I mentioned that, you know, after the war, Syrians were the main migrant laborer who reconstructed Beirut after the end of the war. So, right? So there is only one book on Syrian labor in Lebanon. Literally one. I'm not really, like, it's not an exaggeration. One book on the construction labor, migrant labor, Syrian migrant labor in the reconstruction of Beirut. And Syrians, before even being turned into refugees, have worked in Lebanon in agricultural labor. And now they are the main agricultural migrant but refugees. So there is like, you know, this shift from being migrant labor to refugee labor in Lebanon. And anyway, what do these categories mean? And there is only one student, who is my student, doing work on labor, agricultural labor in Syrian refugees, right? So this is like part of, we create the category of refugees as people who are waiting for the UN, the NGOs, the researcher, but these people are producing for the economy. They are working as labor in the economy. Why do I call them suddenly refugees and they are not the agricultural laborer? They are not, anyway, like, you know, the whole idea of refugee can also, like, we can think about ourselves as citizens through the whole notion of refugees. I'm not like, you know, so it's like, you know, the refugee is something that is unstable, always shifting, but this is our lives too. So, you know, it's like asking the question. Basically, what we need to do is, there are categories that are ready-made and there are perceptions of that, like minorities in the Arab world, like the nation state. Why can't we think of a state without a nation? Because the nation state created the problem of minorities, the problem of those who are outside the state, the stateless, the whatever. So it's all coming from the way the nation state is conceptualized, and then the way we read our categories, depending on a state that is based on a homogeneous group, like what we call it, a homogeneous group that forms the nation. And then everything that is outside of the nation is like minority, is I don't know what, like blah, blah, blah. So maybe we should start decolonizing the whole category of minorities and natives or whatever by splitting, for example, the nation from the states, thinking about like, what the hell is that nation mean? You know what I mean? So that there is so much labor to be done about questioning the categories we work with and their history, like how they were created, how we are looked in them, in order to start decolonizing. Otherwise, we are just like repeating, asking our question depending on categories. It's not that much hard. Like with the category of youth, suddenly became hegemonic. And then if you read the policies and you are thinking outside of the box, you can see that they are using youth instead of class. So it's not like all young people are together, like, you know, if you are 15 to 24. So they are denying the gender differences, class differences, and so on. And then it becomes like all about helping youth. And then when they talk about helping youth, it means like helping the poor. But you don't want to talk about working class, poor, whatever. You talk about youth, it becomes neutral category. And we get always to use it in the same way. And it becomes really problematic and serving hegemonic discourses, not like really debunking them. It's a labor that needs to be put when we are conceptualizing the work about different categories we are using and or creating when we are doing the research. This is, I don't know if I answered you, but yes.
I think that's a fascinating call to action as well, to kind of end our session upon, because we kind of ran out of time. But it's great. We thank you so much, Mayssoun, for the great discussion. It's been a pleasure and really, really insightful. I think we covered a lot of very important questions, and
Yeah.
especially the PhD students among us, I think, benefited a lot. And everybody else, I'm sure, as well. And no, so thanks so much again for taking the time and providing expertise. Everybody else also, thank you for joining in. we gonna have a next session in exactly 3 weeks from now on March the 19th, when it's about mapping and sampling the field, and we'll be joined by Greta Semplici. So be sure to come there as well. And yeah, other than that, thanks so much for joining, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for great conversation. I'm not an expert, I'm just conversing with you. I learned a lot also from the questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.